They told me, give change a chance. Instead, I'm dancing with the minute hand.
Alrighty guys, welcome back to this next little video where today we are going to be taking a look at, well, 3 CPUs, 2 platforms, and a whole lot of information. Information that I don't think simple benchmarks do justice, so it's going to be a little bit more of a talking head style video again today. But please definitely stay tuned, or if you guys are going to, jump to the end of the video because I'm going to be talking about my new project that I'm going to be undertaking here pretty soon. And I would like some input, so if you guys are going to be leaving, definitely check out the end of the video and let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. Alright, so let's today just get into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be talking about. And that is 2 X58 based CPUs that I think are great for gaming, and an X79 CPU that is overpriced but great for gaming. Let's get into it. Okay, so for the X58 series CPUs, we've got the w3680 and the x5687. Now the w3680 is an unlocked CPU that you can overclock on the Chinese X58 Deluxe motherboard. Well, the x5687 is not unlocked, but it does already come in at 3.7 gigahertz out of the box. And its rather good single-core and multi-core performance really does put this 4-core 8-threaded Xeon in a very good light. And the final CPU that we're going to be looking at is the E5-1650 V2. Now, it is definitely overpriced, but it is very good for gaming. Now, this CPU is also unlocked, meaning that we can overclock it on Chinese X79 motherboards. And especially the X79 Green, the motherboard with the active cooling on the VRMs, which actually give us very, very stable overclocks. Okay, so the first test that I had ran between these 3 CPUs was 3D Mark Firestrike. Now this test really does kind of show what I'm talking about when I say that X58 is not all that far behind X79. So for the overall score for the E5-1650, we got a 10,858 overall score with a GPU score of 12,538. For the X5687, we've got an overall score of 9,945 with a GPU score of 12,676. So a decent amount higher than the E5. And for our final CPU, we've got the W3680, which for an overall score got 10,441 with a GPU score of 12,615. Yet again, the same thing, lower CPU score but higher GPU score than the E5-1650. So essentially what it tells you is that the CPU was doing less work and the GPU was doing more work. Now, the overall score between X58 and X79, the X58 was definitely lower, but it did still have a good GPU-based score. And typically it is the GPU-based score which is going to give you the best kind of accurate representation of gaming performance. Now, how does that actually translate into real-world game testing? The first game that I tested was Rainbow Six Siege. Now, this game has been pretty well optimized, and for good reason, too. It is considered to be a very fun esports game. Now, I don't personally play it, but I do like using the benchmark simply based upon the fact that it is very repeatable. Now, for the E5-1650, we got an average score, or an average FPS of 169. For the X5687, which is a quad-core, we got an average score of 166, 3 less FPS. And then for the W3680 quad-core, we got an average of 165. So 4 FPS difference between the top and the bottom, which really does just kind of show you that there wasn't a massive difference when it came to using an R9 290. So, the next test that we did, or the next game that we ran, was CSGO, which is quite notoriously CPU intensive. The E5-1650 got a 180 average FPS score. Now this was a simply, I'm looking and watching the FPS counter what number it stayed on the longest for the longest amount of time. Which I know is not exactly an accurate representation of it, but that's kind of what I had to do now that they've locked out MSI Afterburner from use inside of CSGO, which is kind of stupid, by the way. So for the E5-1650, like I said, it got 186 average FPS. For the X5687, it got an average score of 143, which is quite a distance at 43 FPS, but you're still above that 144 FPS threshold in case you had a high refresh rate monitor. But it's not very likely you're probably going to have a high refresh rate monitor if you're looking at buying and building with a cheap Chinese knockoff motherboard. And then for the W3680, same story. We had 158 average FPS, still lower than the E5-1650, but still above that 144 Hz refresh point. The next test that we did was Dota 2, or the next test that I did was Dota 2. For the E5-1650 V2, it got 138 average FPS, when the X5687 got an average FPS of 93, and the W3680 got an average FPS of 109. So, yet again, between the top and the bottom, there was about a 40 FPS difference. But for Dota 2, that is still acceptable to be playing it at 93 FPS, or it was probably even more likely a little bit higher than that, because I was playing a bot match. That was a bot match with Treant Protector to create as many instances of as many creeps as humanly possible to try and slow down the CPUs or try and bog down the CPUs as much as feasibly possible. And the final gaming benchmark test that I did, I wanted to throw these three CPUs as far under the bus as possible. So I did Ashes of the Singularity, the CPU and GPU test. For the CPU test, I got an average FPS of 38.7 for the E5-1650. For the X5687, I got an average FPS of 22.1. And for the W3680, I got an average FPS of 24.1. So, yet again, that was a pretty rough showing for the X58 series CPUs, but it was also a very rough showing for the E5 CPU, which is 2 generations newer. And for the GPU test, well, the gap got closed very quickly again. For the GPU test on the E5-1650, we got an average FPS of 66. Well, for the X5687, we got an average FPS of 52. And for the W3680, for the GPU test, we got an average FPS of 57. Now that is literally worst case scenario playing Ashes of the Singularity. That game is notoriously resource intensive, which is kind of funny because they actually intended it to be an esports title similar to StarCraft, but I digress. So what exactly did this tell us and show us? Well, yes, X58 is slower on the CPU side than X79, but this was yet again a worst case scenario. This was an E5-1650 V2 overclocked to 4.1 GHz versus a non-overclocked W3680 and a non-overclocked X5680. Now the W3680 could have been overclocked, but I simply didn't do it for this testing purposes because I just didn't. You know, I really should have probably, but I didn't. And yet again, that is the worst case scenario, and that is an overclocked CPU versus 2 non-overclocked CPUs. And so if I were just to have shown you the benchmarks and said, oh hey guys, look at X58 is slower, without saying this was ultimately the worst case scenario, it wouldn't have been a very genuine comparison. So I'm going to stand here today and say the same thing that I've said in the past. X58 might not be the newest, latest, and greatest platform, and it might be slower than X79. It might lack the same features that X79 has, but that does not mean that it is down and out. That does not mean that it can't still game pretty well. So, that has been my opinion and my take on X79 versus X58. And I still, to this day, have X58 PCs, and this is where it's going to actually lead me into what I'm going to talk about next. Okay guys, so I had kind of alluded to doing another project, and this is kind of what I am thinking about. I would really like to do another workstation custom build, but I don't know what kind of workstation I should do. At first I thought Dell Precision T3500 all day, every day, all the way, but I already did the Joker PC out of a Dell Precision, but I do know Dell Precision probably the best, and doing another Dell Precision would really give me the chance to stretch my legs and really prove that customizing these things can be a whole heck of a lot of fun and give you a really cool custom rig. But it is on the X58 platform, meaning that it is slightly slower, but not by much. The other option would be a Dell Precision T3600 or a T3610. Primarily the 3610 because it has the 685 watt power supply in it out of the box, so I wouldn't necessarily have to put another one in here. This is another PC that I think would be really fun to do a custom build in, simply based upon the way that it's an amazing looking chassis, and I think it would be just really cool to do the whole like custom thing. But it is X79, and I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of X79 content moving forward. But if you guys would like to see the X79 stuff and more focus on X79, I'd be more than happy to do it. Another option would be something like a Z400, the HP Z400. Now this would be another X58 based PC, but it would be something closer to, I think it would be considered to be like something a little bit closer to more what standard X58 would look like. Yet again, still doing a full custom top to bottom PC, but I wasn't sure if going for something like an HP Z400 would really be the best option, especially being the fact that price tag's a lot higher, meaning that the budget for this build would be a little bit lower, or it wouldn't be as fun as what I otherwise would think it would be. And especially because for a single dollar more, I could go from an HP Z400 to an HP Z420, yet again, X79. So a much more modern platform, but also a very fun concept for a build. These things, I believe, have 650 watt PSUs in them from the get-go. I don't remember exactly, I'm not exactly sure. Let's see, does it say in the specifications? Nope, it does not, but I'm sure I can find that out with a simple Google search. But HP Z420 was also another option that I'd come up with, and the last one that I kind of thought about was a Lenovo S20, yet again X58, but something about the Lenovo S20 I've always loved the look of. I always thought these things were just good looking PCs. Also, it's got a pretty decent power supply in it, so we could probably do quite a bit. And you know, Lenovo stuff is just always kind of fun to work with. And in that same vein, something like a Lenovo S30 could also be very fun. But you guys are going to have to let me know. I've heard that the Lenovo machines will actually allow a decent amount of in-house overclocking or in-BIOS overclocking, but I am not sure. So I'm kind of leaving it up to you guys to decide. What do you guys think would be the most fun idea for like a workstation type custom build that could be heavily customized and painted and a lot of good stuff? I'm personally leaning towards the Dell Precision simply because I love the way the chassis looks and I have plans for what it could be, but I'm leaving it up to you guys. Let me know in the comment section down below and I will tally up the votes and see what everybody has to say. Well, thank you very much for watching, have a good one, and I will catch you all later. Peace.